Welcome back to my math YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about the derivative of the trig functions. Guys, so far we have covered a lot of different types of functions. Now we want to talk about the trig functions because they are also very important functions. Guys, I'm not going to prove or derive any of the derivatives. In order to actually derive these derivatives, for the trig function, especially the sine and cosine, one has to heavily rely on the limit definition. And there are other basic things or basic concepts that one needs to kind of refresh based on the limit definition. So guys, I highly encourage each one of you taking calculus class to go back and look into your textbook and try to understand and try to go over the proof or derivation of the derivatives using the limit definition for the sine and the cosine function. Guys, for the other trig functions, the tangent, the cotangent, secant and cosecant, one can go back to the limit definition, but one really does not have to go back to the limit definition. One can use the sine and cosine as like the basics to prove or to derive the derivatives for the other functions. Here guys, I'm only going to write the general derivatives, the general rules, which you can also find on in your textbooks or from a formula sheet, and then we are going to use those rules to actually find the derivative of different trig functions. Guys, keep in mind, it's not just going to be finding the derivative of a trig function by itself. We're still going to need the product rule, the power rule, the quotient rule, all the other rules, or in fact the chain rule, to actually evaluate many of these derivatives. So without any delay, let me start with writing the derivative of these trig functions. Guys, the first one is the derivative of the sine function. So the derivative of the sine function is simply the cosine function. Guys, please check the definition in your textbook to see how we actually get that. Then number two is what is the derivative of the cosine function. So the derivative of the cosine function actually is slightly different in a way that it's a negative sine x, not just sine x, it's negative sine x, and that is something again that we can see. Yes, we can see this from a visual perspective, but it's easier to see it more like from the limit definition. Guys, these are the two basic ones, and based on these two actually we can derive the rest of them. So when I learned this for the first time, I used to only remember these two, and the rest of them I was able to derive quickly either by using the quotient rule or the product rule or any of the combination of those rules. So guys, here I'm going to write the other ones as well. I'm not saying you have to remember all of them. If you are allowed to use a formula sheet, then fine, you can use the formula sheet. Otherwise, you have to figure out a technique to remember these. Guys, number three is the derivative of the tangent function. And the derivative of the tangent function is the secant square of x. So guys, again, if I have to find the derivative of this tangent function, what we can do here is, we know tangent is the ratio of the sine over cosine, so I can write this as sine over cosine, and then I can use the quotient rule on that, and I will also use these things and some identities, and finally I will get secant square x. So it is not too difficult to actually get the derivative of tan x, derive the derivative of tan x to be equal to secant square x. Then moving on, guys, number four is what is the derivative of the cotangent, which is the reciprocal of the tangent, and the derivative of the cotangent is negative cosecant square x, which is the reciprocal of the sine. Here we know secant is the reciprocal of the cosine. And then guys, we have two more, the derivative of the secant and the derivative of the cosecant. So what do I have for the derivative of the secant? The derivative of the secant x is secant x tan x. That is the derivative of the secant x. And then again, we can derive this from the fact that the secant x is 1 over cosine. We already know the derivative of the cosine. For 1 over cosine, we can use the quotient rule, and from that we can get the derivative to be secant x tan x. Of course, we still have to use some trig identities. And then guys, number six is the derivative of the cosecant x, and that is negative cosecant x, and then I have a cotangent x. So guys, these are the six basic, 1 and 2 are the basic ones, and then we can derive the rest from 1 and 2 and using the quotient rule and other trig identities. So guys, please take a note of this. If you are not allowed to use a formula sheet, then one has to remember this. Otherwise, you can use a formula sheet whenever you have to evaluate the derivative of trig functions. So guys, in my next video, I'm going to start showing you some examples and we'll try to do like different types of examples in this section as well, so you guys become more confident with dealing or finding the derivative of functions which involve the trig functions. Okay, I will see you in the next video.